Good afternoon, everyone. It's Dr. Gershon with another BetterHealth webinar. I am thrilled to be here with a real leader and a visionary, Christian Dansereau. He is leading a company called Perceiv AI, and he's going to tell you an incredible journey that he's been on as a scientist, as an entrepreneur, and as someone who is passionate about improving healthcare, and particularly improving the predictive value that his technology can bring to looking at patient diseases and where that platform technology is right now and where it can go. But before introducing you to Christian, I just want to say once again, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your incredible support over these many months. We've had some incredible featured speakers in incredible companies that are very authentic, and they are building out this really fantastic community of leaders who want to collaborate. And Christian, I think, it really represents and embodies many of those incredible desires to reach out, to let people know what amazing entrepreneurs and CEOs are doing and what they might need for support. The cross-pollination of companies is part of what Endeavor Venture Studios focuses in on. And Christian and I have already been talking about how some of his technologies can intersect with some of the portfolio companies that are part of Endeavor, intersecting in areas like clinical research. And so we're going to talk with a hope that our conversation sparks more and more people wanting to participate as featured speakers, more and more entrepreneurs wanting to be collaborators in this open community of sharing. So with that, I want to just introduce you to Christian, a fantastic person, a great leader, a terrific CEO, and I would like him to spend a little introductory time telling everyone here about himself and how he got to this particular point. And I will tell you, he is a modest fellow, so I'm going to have to pull some things out because he's gotten a lot of traction over the past few weeks. Christian, welcome, and I'm very appreciative of your time here.
Thank you so much, Martin, for inviting me. It's a true pleasure to be on this webinar, and I'm really happy to be talking to you. So to give you a bit of context, maybe, so my background, I'm an engineer by training. I did my PhD in computer science and worked most of my academic career on application of AI and predictive tools in the neurology space, mainly in Alzheimer's disease, but also worked a bit in epilepsy, schizophrenia, and the bulk of it in Alzheimer's disease. I've also worked with pharmaceutical companies during that time. And this is where I saw some of the issues in those trials, or at least I was amazed by the lack of knowledge we had about the patient that we were recruiting in these trials in terms of how they would progress during the trial. So we were recruiting them based on crude inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then we were hoping for the best during the trial. And I thought it was very high risk for pharma, for the patient, for everybody to go blind basically in these trials. And I thought we could do better by leveraging the wealth of data that we currently have on these patients at the beginning of these trials and try to figure out a bit, or at least uncover a bit of light or a bit of what's going to come next to these patients so that we can take more appropriate decision about these individuals. So that was the inception of the company. The company is Perceiv is precision medicine company. We focus mainly on forecasting disease evolution, so predicting how patient will progress in their disease across the disease spectrum and in the near-term future. So for these predictions to be actionable, you need to have also a forecast that is relatively near-term. If you have a forecast about 10 years or 20 years.
Christian, just 1 second. I think there might be something wrong with your audio.
Oh,
You're coming in
yeah.
a little bit garbled, at least on my side.
Let
So
me,
you might want to switch over to another microphone.
yeah.
Here. Is it better?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Should I restart, or we have
Maybe do a
gist of
20
it?
second, a 20-second. Yeah.
So yeah, the company Perceiv is really focused, is a precision medicine company, but we are focused on forecasting disease evolution, the near-term disease evolution of these patients. So the next few years, up to 2 years, of how they will progress in their disease across the disease spectrum. And that kind of insight, or that prognostic insight, has a lot of value to take better decision when we select more high quality patients in clinical trials, to optimize them and fast track them, and also in the clinic to simplify the patient journey, get to a diagnostic faster and a treatment faster. Our current focus is in neurological disease mainly, and in Alzheimer's disease, where we have our first flagship product called Foresight 80, which is predicting cognitive decline in the next 2 years across the disease spectrum.
Fantastic. I want to just take a very quick pause, as I always do, just to thank people who have logged on. And I want to also encourage people, first, when you log on, tell us where you're from, because we do have an international community, and this is a community building endeavor. And second, if you have a question, we're certainly going to try to answer it. But if you put your email in, we most certainly will send you a response through email. So I really want to thank Leon for signing in from New York. He actually has a fantastic nonprofit, which I would love to introduce everybody to at a later date on social media. He is one of the most altruistic givers I've ever met. I don't know him that well, but his organization is literally helping thousands of people in New York who need food and clothing and basic services. So thank you, Leon, for signing on. Martin from Norway, just thank you again. Nikhil, who is one of our CEOs in Clinical Trial Hero as part of our portfolio company that possibly will be working with Christian and Perceiv for their shared interest in helping patients. Jenny, who is just a fantastic, fantastic director of communications from New York. Reno, thank you for signing in from California. Dick from Napa Valley. Miram, currently I think you're in Pennsylvania, but I know that you have ties internationally. Thank you for signing on. Malik, you have a tremendous story to tell. Please share that on social media. Another company that we work with in the genomics and rare disease therapy space. Thank you for signing on. Gene as well. So great shout out and appreciation for everybody. And now back to Christian to kind of pick up to amplify on the story about Perceiv.
Yeah, so maybe starting off with the clinical trial and some of the challenges in clinical trials. We have a lot of heterogeneity in these populations that we select in clinical trials. You have patients that will remain stable, others that will progress at different rates, and that creates a lot of confusion and uncertainty for pharmaceutical companies and even for physicians in terms of how they will diagnose these individuals or who they should actually more optimally recruit in these trials. In order for a trial to be successful, you need to have people that will progress during the trial, during the short time window of the trial. And currently, we use those inclusion-exclusion criteria that have these individuals seems to be at the more or less same stage, but at the end of the day, they progress very differently from one subject to the other, even though they seems on paper to be similar in terms of where they are in their disease. And then you need to compensate for that by increasing your sample size, having longer trial, bigger trial. And this is obviously something that we would like to avoid, to conduct more trials and faster trials in the future. And by selecting more appropriate individuals that will actually show benefit during the short time window of the trial, you are able to achieve higher power of those studies, smaller sample size, and really conduct these trials in a more efficient way that is more likely to succeed also.
Absolutely can't underscore enough times the importance of this. The cost of a typical drug from concept, target, validating, and through the preclinical and then the clinical process to commercialization is $2.5 billion, 12 and a half years. Now, an outlier in this is the outgrowth of technology with one of my favorite companies that I think is a poster child of what science and innovation can do, which is in silico. They have used AI to bring a drug to market in 30 months, which is outstanding. And they've driven much of the work in the preclinical and in the clinical areas using AI. And so I think that that has swung the door wide open for commercial validation about the things that Perceiv can contribute to moving drugs that are innovative and novel therapies to patients quicker and cheaper is just core of what Christian and I are committed to be doing. And I will also add that there is this at least bifurcation which goes to the same place, which is the notion that clinical trials are a step in the process of finding the right patient trial fit, as Christian was saying, creates efficiencies. It also empowers the patient to be able to participate and continue and be retained in the trial to completion. And then second, the notion of this predictive value, which I'm sure Christian is going to be talking about, which is this ability to use technology to look ahead to see how is the patient potentially going to interact with a particular drug. What are the constellation of data points, whether it's social determinants of health or genetics or other things that Christian is focusing in on, that will look at predictive value about treatment algorithms. So when you combine this combination of clinical trial efficiencies and the ability to change treatment algorithms, it's a very powerful combination.
That's a great point. Actually, the other outlier in terms of cost of clinical trials is Alzheimer's disease, where it's not 2 billion, but 5 billion in this case. So wow. Even more expensive because they have so much modalities, imaging that are extremely costly, and those trials are extremely long also. So even more compounding effect on that. And as you pointed out, I think we're now, in the past decade or so, we had a lot of investments in preclinical development, identifying new therapies and new targets. And now we're starting to see a bit the fruits of that investment, and a few companies bringing these drugs in the clinic or in clinical trial evaluation now. And the new bottleneck or the next one will be the clinical trial period, where you have 99% failure rate in clinical trial in Alzheimer's disease. It's a bit lower in other disease, but it's still higher than 85%. The success rates of the failure rates, of drugs going through the 3 phases of evaluation. So I think that's going to be a very important point to not miss, because if we have 1 million new therapies and they are all failing in clinical trials, it's not going to get through to the hands of the patient and the physician. So we really need to solve that part as well. That is quite critical at the end of the day.
I think what you're talking about, and I know this is a bit of an overused expression, but it really holds true in this case. It is a paradigm shift. The technologies that we're seeing right now in AI, machine learning, deep tech, they really are changing our lives, and they will change our lives, and that change will accelerate over the next 10 years. I will say that part of my excitement at this point in my career, and we are on our second fund, Endeavor 2, is that I've never seen such enthusiasm by great entrepreneurs like yourself, coupled with hockey stick change in technology. And it's been building over the past, 5+ years, but now it's all coming together. So people have the tools to be able to combine with their creative ideas. And so again, the purpose of this webinar is to inspire collaboration, is to inspire creative thought, is to inspire great CEOs from large companies to small companies, researchers across the board in healthcare to come together, because these are such complex problems. You're talking about a $5 billion study for Alzheimer's disease. I actually didn't know those numbers until now. That's just, it's not sustainable. So we need a change. Part of what's exciting now is the government, believe it or not, is actually getting behind this. And so the FDA has now mandated certain regulatory changes, which are promoting more accurate data, greater power to the studies, more focused in on safety and efficacy across the board, which in many cases focuses in on how we pick the patients for trials, particularly diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is part of this, process, which is not fully perfected yet. So I think that the technology not only is going to speed things, not only is it going to make it more accurate, but it's going to be more equitable, which is super exciting for us.
No, totally. Equity, I think, is very important that we do test these drugs on a more representative population. Although I would say that it's going to create some issues also for a clinical trial. I mean, first, obviously, to find these individuals, to convince them to actually come to these clinical trials, to participate in those, which they historically have not. We can talk about how the process of selecting sites just after and selecting patient and how it has been done in the past, and maybe some of the few avenues that could be done in the future. But it's really important that we that will add noise, basically, or at least more variability into the mix, which will most probably impact the clinical trial or its power, and we'll need to account for that or figure out ways to compensate for that. Because even with our more curated white population, we had challenges to find the appropriate population. Adding a more diverse population will certainly not solve any of these problems. It's just going to increase those issues. So I think it's going to be even more critical to adopt strategies and smart strategies to really make sure that we have the right individuals that will actually behave the way we expect them to behave for a successful trial.
Yeah. It's really, I want to talk a little bit about your technology, because it is really, the technology intersecting, with the human interaction that solves this problem. And so, with the company that we spoke about earlier, Dr. Joshi is the CEO of Clinical Trial Hero, that focuses in on one narrow section, which is the disenfranchised or historically disenfranchised community, not only for identification, but engagement. And you talk about, engagement of patients makes better clinical trials, and we completely support that. So we are partnering now with, community leaders in various underrepresented communities to build trust, to build an understanding of what these patients can contribute. And my hope and my belief is that within the next 5 years, patients will be engaged through your company, through Clinical Trial Hero, through other companies, to change the way clinical trials are designed. This is the 5-year plan that we see as very reasonable. Inputting personal data from patients whose voices are not heard can be achieved through the use of virtual reality and other technologies. And being able to reach out to them and engage in this process, we're hoping creates a flywheel, a momentum within the community that people feel empowered that their voice can reach industry and can change the design process.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think in terms of our technology per se, so what we are doing is combining or using multimodal information. So we combine the existing information that is normally collected in clinical trials and in the clinic, so that we can be a layer of insight on top of the information that is already there. We're not introducing any new modalities into the mix. We're just supporting and giving better insight and merging all that information together. So the kind of modalities that we are supporting right now are imaging, structural MRI, genetic information, biomarkers. So there are several of them that are relevant in Alzheimer's disease, lumbar punctures, CSF, blood markers as well, and cognitive tests that are kind of critical because they are the main outcome usually, or they will serve as the main outcome of these studies. That gives you a bit of an idea of where these patients are. And that's what we are ingesting in our platform to make those forecasts. And the forecast that we do, as I said, are very near-term forecasts. So 2 years, which is the typical duration of a trial, if that patient will remain stable or will progress at different degrees. And with that, you can take actionable decision in terms of adding them to the trial or not prior to randomization.
Just, really fantastic. I mean, it unfortunately is such a ubiquitous disease, and as the demographics, drive that forward with an aging population, and we really don't understand as much as we need to about the, horse and cart, whether plaques are the causative agent, whether they're the result of the process, whether removal of the plaques is curative, or whether it's just a byproduct. I mean, there's so many unanswered questions. We do know a lot, but we don't know enough. And so what you're doing, is absolutely so necessary and so inspiring, because you are climbing a pretty steep mountain, my friend.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's why also we want to have insight that is not drug specific necessarily, or what should we know from these patients if not treated? And that's the kind of prognostic insight that we're bringing. Eventually, we'll be able also to identify the individuals that respond better to a specific drug, because we have more follow-up of these individuals on these drugs and can identify specific signatures of these individuals. But that's going to take a bit of time, but not that much time, given that there is 2 new drugs that will most likely come to the market in a very, very short time period on the clinical side, and that's going to change completely the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
There's still other bottlenecks that will come from that, like the fact that we are not diagnosing them at the right time or very late in the disease process, which is not the right time window for these new drugs to intervene. Their best time window is really in the early phases before dementia, when you start to have mild symptoms. And so we need to simplify the journey of these patients, identify these individuals sooner. And one of the critical things, or the problems that is currently happening, is that physician will wait for symptoms to deteriorate in order to be confident in the diagnosis. And obviously that watchful waiting time is lost time for the patient and potentially for the physician as well. So why not forecasting that likely progression so that we can intervene or start the investigation right away? So that's the thesis on the clinical side that I think will really help us find, diagnose, and start treating these individuals sooner.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I would add another layer on that as a neuroscientist myself. So, part of the problem is education. There's not a lot of physicians who really, really understand, this disease.
Yeah.
Part of that problem is the educational input. Part of it is the economics of it. You get a lot of money if you do a colonoscopy. You don't get a lot of money if you spend an hour with an Alzheimer's patient. And this is a unique problem to the United States. Most other countries have figured this problem out. That's a whole other kind of political and policy-driven conversation. But I think the point is that when there is an effective treatment, the mindset of physicians will change. Now, that begs the question, understanding that cognitive dysfunction is seen in multiple diseases. So it's not just Alzheimer's, and that's part of the problem that has been embedded in some of the drug approvals. So, whether it's, PICS or some other, acute neurodegenerative disease, or it's a chronic neurodegenerative disease. I mean, these are fine-tuned aspects of how physicians actually engage, and what their response might be. So your ability to actually have a predictive, hopefully quantitative as well as qualitative assessment, I think will give tremendous functionality to physicians engaging. I really believe that.
Yeah, and that's the aim, right? To support them. As you pointed out earlier, this is a complex disease, very much multifactorial. There is multiple elements or modalities that you need to acquire to really wrap your hand around it, and it starts to be quite complex. And to be able to support them or guide them through that process or that investigation as a clinical decision support tool is, I think, the way to go. Because sometimes they don't necessarily know like what they should get next in terms of modalities to continue the investigation, or so just to give them the guidelines, support them along the way as they accumulate more information about that patient will be critical. Regarding the policy or the way we will deploy these drugs will be also very important. These are expensive drugs. They are not perfect. They have some efficacy that is still way better than it was before, but they are not solving the whole question. This is just the beginning. I think that's going to spur out a lot of clinical trials on the other side, because we'll need to probably have a combination therapy to be able to really address the full problem. But that's going to be a very interesting time in the next few years on these topics for sure. And we'll need to appropriately identify and treat these individuals, because if we were to treat everybody at the same time, we'll probably break the system, right?
Right.
So we need to be careful in who has the most potential to have benefit at this time, this precise time, and kind of manage that workflow of individuals that are seeking care or potentially looking for potential therapies like that.
Yeah, and I want to focus in, get a little bit into the weeds here. So you talked about biomarkers. So again, cognitive dysfunction has a rainbow of different diseases, acute, intermediate, chronic, manifestations.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the biomarkers that you are looking at that you think are quite interesting. And then if you're comfortable talking about maybe one of the drugs that's coming to market, some of the pluses and minuses. I mean, it's been quite a journey for some of this drug development over the past few years, with a lot of, hills and valleys. I am not sure how that is going to roll out in a real world setting, but love to hear your ideas about these two aspects, because I do think that they're combined. I think physicians are much more comfortable prescribing a drug when they have something quantitative like a biomarker, and then understanding like this is a drug that we expect to do X, Y, and Z. And that last part is also dependent on timing, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So related to the biomarkers, we know that there is some biomarkers or proteins like amyloid and tau that are associated with the disease, but they are not like necessarily the direct cause, or like if you just remove one, everything stops. But still, they are involved, and the new results are the two new trials that have from two different companies that have with two different therapies removing amyloid have shown like around 30% effectiveness in reducing the progression of these individuals in terms of their cognition. That shows, and that's a replication also of these kind of findings, so that even puts more weight. Even like, those trials were quite massive and quite big, but two replication of similar targets with different drugs from two different companies, I think this is much more compelling evidence that I hope will convince physicians on that front. Biomarkers are important. At the end of the day, if you're removing a particular thing, you should probably measure it at the beginning and at the end of your treatment, or even between. That makes sense, and that will be necessary for clinical deployment as well. This is in part why we have more success in clinical trials and clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease, but also in oncology, is when we started to actually measure the things that we are trying to affect, like the biomarkers. We started to have a better insight about the actual disease. In terms of the new
CSF samples or
yeah, so
samples,
yeah, so the two in vivo hallmark biomarkers are PET imaging with tracers for amyloid and tau, and CSF lumbar punctures, where you can also measure different biomarkers, among which amyloid and tau, phosphorylated tau. There's new markers that are coming on the market that are very promising, and I think they will take over a large portion of that, or hopefully replace at some point the necessity to completely rely on PET and CSF, because PET is expensive and CSF is relatively invasive. So they are not very practical at scale. And therefore, any sorts of replacement or pre-screening to maximize your chances of being positive, and just a confirmation with a PET or a CSF, or completely replacing them with that is more manageable, like a blood draw, would be very promising. There is very, very good results on that. These are coming relatively soon. I hope next year on the market. There is a few companies that have started commercializing them, but they are not widely adopted. I think with the new drugs that are coming, that's going to be more widely adopted in the future. But this is very exciting. Like, once we have these blood markers, we'll be able to screen more widely, or at least, and it's going to be accessible also to a greater population, right? It's not just going to be in very specific centers. In that very excellent center in Boston or New York, you will be able to also have it in very remote region, which I think in terms of equity will be also a very, very big improvement. So those are definitely exciting. We are also supporting these blood markers that are still research rate at this point, but obviously we see that they will come very soon. So we're integrating them in our platform. But those one will be very, very transformative for sure.
So let's take a look at your crystal ball. Let's take a look about, since you're Canadian, where the puck is going. since Wayne Gretzky, as one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah, so I think, in terms of Alzheimer's disease, I kind of alluded to that a little bit, but what we see with amyloid is that these drugs have an effect, and these amyloid has a role to play, but it's a portion of the story, so it's about 30% or so of reduction. If we want to reach the 100 or around like 70, 80%, we'll need to most probably attack other well-known markers of the disease, like tau and inflammation. So it's going to be and potentially other stuff. So it's going to be a combination of several therapies at the end of the day that I think will really make a very, very big impact. This is already coming. It's in the pipeline. There are several tau drugs at several stages of the clinical trial process. There's a few talks about combination therapy already. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see that coming. There's other biomarkers or targets that will be interesting also to target. It's just that we don't necessarily have biomarkers yet. So the reliable markers to really measure them. So I think the future, or the near future, that I hope will be to have these smaller, faster trials that we can execute on, that will be able to test multiple hypotheses and drugs and get that faster to the hands of physician, and also make sure that we monitor these drugs also in the clinic. Once we deploy them, I think the worst thing we could do is to treat extremely widely without measuring what's going on, or
Right.
This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of treatment. We need to have the right people at the right time, and we need to be careful with that because they also have side effects. So the balance is important in terms of benefit and risk. And if we monitor these individuals appropriately, this is a very doable thing to do. It's just we need to monitor the efficacy, we need to monitor these patients, and we need to have different strata of risk of these individuals also, because some of them will discover that in the coming years, but some of them have more risk than others, and we'll need to figure out who those people are so that we can take more care of these individuals and watch them more closely. And the other ones may not necessarily require that heavy system around them, right?
Right. And then lastly, really, in keeping with this kind of crystal ball thing, it's really about, supporting your company, supporting you. Where do you see the company? You clearly have a big picture, high level view of the industry, about the drugs, about the biomarkers, about the potential impact on patients, both the good and the bad, because as you said, there are side effects, and we're constrained, in many different ways, whether it's economics or whether it's, kind of the side effect profiles, et cetera. But, part of this community is an outreach. Part of this webinar is an outreach. So let's say over the next 3 years, and I know that, with an emerging company, it's, kind of moment by moment or quarter by quarter, but you have a great vision. So in terms of collaboration partnerships that you would be looking for, to support this process, what do you see as important for you over the next few years? And how can this community reach out in some fashion to help you?
Yeah, I think you've pointed that out earlier. Like it's an ecosystem. We'll need to build that ecosystem of various solution providers that play a role. Like we are one small part of that solution, right? There is other parts of integration, getting the data out of some of these infrastructure or these clinical centers. This is a specialty on its own. Building part of that network is important also. So having that interconnected network and ecosystem will be critical to really have a fluid deployment of these types of solution in the next one that we will create, hopefully in the next few years and few months. So having these partners, innovative partners, can be startups, it can be more established companies, CROs, pharmaceutical companies that are really taking that step forward towards more innovation, de-risking what they are actually currently doing, and for the benefit of the patient and the whole ecosystem as well.
Yeah, well, I can say certainly from the Endeavor standpoint, we're completely behind what you're doing and happy to leverage our ecosystem to advance your company and other companies. I would also say that we are going to put together at some point this year a congratulatory get together of all the featured speakers and the companies so that they can share ideas. These are terrific people who work 24/7 and who are committed to helping patients. And so I would like to say thank you to everyone personally. So stay tuned. That will be a private, non-recorded event, so you can speak freely. But we will then, I think, send out the message, to the community, with a unified voice, hopefully, that we're working together as CEOs, as investors, as entrepreneurs, as committed healthcare professionals and scientists, and then ultimately it's the people who are tuning in and the companies that are watching this that are going to really be the fuel for the engine. So thank you everybody so much for everything that you've already contributed. I can tell you that companies that have been on as featured speakers have received a very significant investor interest, both financially and strategically. And we want to continue to build on that. This is about, communities coming together. It's not about a pitch. It's about, doing good, improving patient outcomes, improving predictive values as part of that process. So Christian, I can't thank you enough for what you and your team are doing. I want to invite you back immediately to meet Dr. Joshi, who is also, committed to improving clinical trials. Perhaps the two of you can come on and change the world together.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah. And I want to thank everyone once again. Just a quick shout out to people. We have people now from India, Eric from Princeton, New Jersey, Joachim from the Finnish archipelago. That I really like because I'm a sailor. We have Amara from Pakistan. We've got Jean from Atlanta. Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting Christian endeavor and BetterHealth. And please stay tuned for more exciting companies every Tuesday. And as a kicker to all this, we will be adding on, probably at the end of the summer or the beginning of the fall, podcasts of short duration to both invite speakers back for updates. So Christian, you're formally invited to participate in our podcast series in the next few months to give us more updates. We haven't even touched on the amazing things that you and Plug and Play have done over the past few weeks. So that's a teaser for everybody because his company is really on a tear. And we support all the work that Plug and Play has done, as well as the Merck Accelerator, who is focused in on digital healthcare. And we can talk about that next time we're together because they're doing an absolutely fantastic job. So thank you once again, Christian. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a true pleasure and looking forward to our next conversation.
Fantastic. So everyone, thank you for tuning in. Christian, if you can stay on for just a couple minutes. Look forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday at noon. Please register. We'll send out an invite shortly. Goodbye, everybody.